happens usually late at night when we're most vulnerable. The endless scroll through New Year, New Me posts. Weight loss journeys, career transformations, life makeovers. Each one a carefully curated story of reinvention that makes us question everything about ourselves. We save these posts, make our resolutions, promise ourselves that this time we'll finally become that perfect version of ourselves we've imagined. It's exhausting, and as we'll see through the following stories, deadly. The pressure to transform ourselves never really goes away. It just gets better at hiding. What starts as innocent self-improvement becomes an exhausting performance, an endless show where we're both the star and our own harshest critic. And no stories capture this destructive theater quite like Perfect Blue and Black Swan. Both fellow performers, Mima, a pop idol turned actress, and Nina, a ballet dancer, whose professional acts begin to blur with their desperate attempts to become better versions of themselves. While most of us aren't performing on stage, we're all caught up in this endless show, playing the role of someone constantly improving, constantly transforming. In Perfect Blue, Mima's nightmare begins when she discovers Mima's Room, a website documenting her daily life with terrifying accuracy. This digital diary insists she never wanted to become an actress, that a fake version of herself is ruining her reputation. It's chillingly familiar in an age where our past selves live online forever, each post and photo an archived identity that can judge our attempts at change. The real horror for Mima isn't the stalker maintaining the website. It's how the diary's contents begin to feel more real than Mima herself. Nina's transformation in Black Swan reaches its breaking point in a scene where she watches her reflection fragment into something independent. Her mother's voice echoes about perfection while she obsessively checks for flaws, scratches, waist measurements, any imperfection that might mar her performance. But it's not just the dance she's perfecting anymore. It's her entire existence. Every movement, every interaction becomes another scene in her endless performance of becoming better. The hallucinations these characters experience reflects our modern anxieties. Nina sees herself transforming physically, her toes fusing into the perfect on-point shape, black feathers erupting from her glistening dimpled flesh. A grotesque manifestation of how we tear ourselves apart trying to evolve into something so different it's unrecognizable. Mima finds her former, perfect idol self stalking her, haunting her with a trail of bodies and belittling her choices. It cuts to the bone because we're all haunted this way, scrolling through feeds full of people who seem to have achieved what we're killing ourselves to reach, while our past selves sit on our profiles, watching and judging every failed attempt we make. The most devastating parallel emerges in their climactic moments. Both protagonists achieve their perfect performance only through complete psychological collapse. Nina's declaration, "I felt it, it was perfect," comes moments after she's fatally wounded herself. Mima reclaims her identity only after facing the physical manifestation of her former self, one who would rather see her dead than imperfect. What makes these two stories so terrifying isn't the supernatural elements. It's how they expose the exhausting performance of perfection. In the new year, we commit to glowing up, but we're not just changing our habits. We're putting on an endless show, performing our transformation until we become unrecognizable even to ourselves. When you make your resolutions this year, remember the real fear shouldn't be that we might fail. It's that when self-improvement is performative, the curtain never falls, the performance never ends, until there's nothing left of us but the act itself. When we start performing perfection long enough, we start believing that act. The audience's demands become our inner voice, and that's when the real destruction begins. Both Fight Club and BoJack Horseman show us what happens when we try to hate ourselves better. A brutal cycle where self-loathing masquerades as self-improvement. Our guides through this psychological minefield, if you're unaware, are 2-minute war with themselves. An unnamed office worker so disconnected from his own identity that he creates an alter ego to destroy his life, and BoJack, a washed-up sitcom star whose attempts at redemption constantly spiral into self-destruction. In Fight Club, we watch the unnamed narrator attempt to find authenticity through lies. He attends support groups for terminal illnesses he doesn't have, discovers that losing all hope was freedom, and sleeps soundly for the first time in months. It's telling that his peace comes only when pretending to be someone else. His life is a carefully curated catalog of possessions and personas, each one more empty than the last. If you wake up in a different time, in a different place, he wonders, could you wake up as a different person? This search for authenticity leads the narrator to create Tyler Durden, an idealized self born from self-hatred. "I want you to hit me as hard as you can," Tyler begs, believing that only through violence can he kill the unstable, consuming part of himself. But you can't punch your way to a better self. Each fight, each act of destruction just fragments his identity further, until he can't tell which version of himself is the original anymore. This desperate search for a new identity echoes through BoJack's endless cycle of celebrity redemption arcs. In one particularly revealing scene from That's Too Much Man, BoJack attends an AA meeting not to recover, but to perform his guilt. He boos others' honest confessions while dramatically recounting his own misdeeds, turning even his moments of self-reflection into entertainment. Like the unnamed narrator support groups, it's vulnerability as theater. This pattern of self-destruction reaches its breaking point in BoJack's desperate attempt to rewrite his friend Diane's biography of him. He can't stand seeing himself through her honest lens, so he locks himself away on a drug-fueled bender, trying to create a version of himself that's heroic, loved, worthy. When he finally emerges, he begs Diane to tell him he's a good person. Years later, the roles reverse. He visits a depressed Diane in Chicago, finally in a position to offer genuine help. But immediately after he does so, he can't face his own truth, can't admit to his role in another friend's bender-related death. His self-hatred runs so deep that he'd rather preserve the lie than risk looking relatable. For him, the performance is easier than to be really seen. What makes these stories devastating is how they expose the commodification of self-improvement. The narrator rebels against his consumer identity by creating Tyler, only to build another kind of conformity through an underground movement dedicated to violently dismantling society. BoJack repeatedly sells his recovery story to the media, turning personal growth into content. Both characters are trapped in a system that promises transformation through consumption. But what's truly insidious is that both of these protagonists at some point know they're performing. When BoJack's daughter asks if the voice in her head telling her she's worthless will ever go away, he lies and says yes. The narrator creates an entire alternate personality rather than confront his genuine concerns about himself. They're both so convinced of their unworthiness that they'd rather destroy themselves than risk genuine change. Because that's the trap of trying to hate yourself better. It's not really about improvement at all. Whether it's orchestrating mass destruction in the name of freedom, or BoJack's cycles of relapse and redemption, it's just another way of running from who you really are. Real change requires something both of these characters are terrified of: accepting the possibility that you might be worthy of love, even in your most imperfect form. Now, our obsession with self-improvement runs far deeper than just hating who we are. Sometimes it's fueled by those we admire most, twisted into something that masquerades as guidance but functions as control. Other times, it manifests as paralyzing restraint, where our fear of our potential becomes its own kind of prison. A young jazz drummer and a middle school psychic might seem like an unlikely pair, but both Whiplash and Mob Psycho 100 embody our fixation on being special and how it can transform mentorship into manipulation and self-control into self-destruction. In Whiplash, we watch Andrew, a drummer accepted into a prestigious conservatory where he bleeds for his art, practicing until his hands are raw, chasing the approval of a teacher who weaponizes his desire for greatness. There are no two words in the English language more harmful than good job, Fletcher tells him, turning Andrew's passion into an exercise in perpetual punishment. Even after surviving a car crash, Andrew rushes to perform, covered in glass and dripping wounds, and still, Fletcher's approval remains far out of reach. The ending of Whiplash is horrific in a way. It ends with Fletcher smiling, Andrew smiling, and Andrew's father looking on in horror as he sees what this life of pressure and anxiety will do to his son. This pursuit of greatness costs Andrew everything in his life. He breaks up with his girlfriend because even a dinner date threatens his practice time. His family relationships wither as he insists they just don't understand his ambitions. Fletcher breeds a toxic environment deliberately, keeping his students terrified they'll be replaced at any moment, making them compete not just with each other, but with their own limitations. It's a pressure that doesn't just push them to improve, it breaks them. Meanwhile, Mob, a typical middle schooler who thinks he's not good at anything, is actually a powerful sidekick who takes the opposite approach, suppressing his extraordinary abilities out of fear of hurting others. His self-imposed restraint builds up like a pressure cooker, exploding with devastating consequences whenever his emotions reach 100%. The Body Improvement Club becomes Mob's unexpected sanctuary, a place where growth isn't measured by natural talent, but by consistent effort. Unlike his psychic powers, which he fears and suppresses, physical training gives him a way to improve without the risk of destroying everything around him. It's a different kind of strength, one built through acceptance and encouragement, rather than control. What makes Mob's story particularly powerful is how it subverts our expectations of the gifted protagonist trope. Instead of celebrating his extraordinary powers, we watch him grapple with the weight of suppressing them. His mentor Reagan, though a self-proclaimed psychic who can't bend a spoon, ultimately teaches Mob something far more valuable than power control: the importance of being human. In the show's finale, Mob finally confronts his other self, the part of him that's been suppressed and judged for so long. This jaded, powerful side of him had grown stronger with every moment Reagan seemed to use him, every time his feelings were disregarded. Their relationship takes an unexpected turn when Reagan expresses his fraudulent nature publicly. But what's revealing isn't the revelation itself. Mob had always suspected Reagan wasn't really psychic. What matters is Reagan's willingness to finally admit his deception, choosing honesty with Mob over maintaining his facade. It's a moment that shows how true mentorship isn't about maintaining power over someone. It's about being vulnerable enough to show your own flaws. This stands in stark contrast to Fletcher's relationship with Andrew. While Fletcher demands perfection through fear, Reagan tells Mob something revolutionary in its simplicity. You must embrace that characteristic as part of yourself and continue to live positively. After all, the truth behind one's charm is kindness, so just be a good person, okay? It's advice that seems almost absurdly gentle compared to Fletcher's chairs being thrown across rooms, but it's exactly what Mob needs to hear. Both stories ultimately show us different paths in the pursuit of being special. Andrew fragments himself through obsessive practice, while Mob learns to integrate the parts of himself he fears most. One relationship leads to blood on the drum kit, the other to understanding that being extraordinary isn't about power at all. It's about accepting yourself completely, even the parts that might scare you. What if we've been measuring improvement all wrong? What if the very metrics we use to judge our growth, New Year's resolutions or otherwise, are part of the problem? The Good Place takes this question to a literal place, a universe where every human action is scored and only the highest achievers make it to heaven. We follow Eleanor Shellstrop, a self-described Arizona trash bag, who finds herself accidentally sorted into heaven after death, and Chidi Aragonye, an ethics professor so paralyzed by the pursuit of perfect choices that he can barely choose a muffin. Their afterlife is run by a point system that assigns numerical values to every action. Positive points for acts of kindness, negative for moral failures. It's not so different from our own obsessive tracking of likes, weight, dollar signs, productivity metrics, or other numbers we use to quantify our worth. Their initial attempts at self-improvement mirror our own desperate New Year's resolutions. Eleanor fakes being good to avoid being discovered and sent to hell, while Chidi obsesses over finding the mathematically perfect moral answer to every situation, convinced that every problem has an answer. This pursuit of perfection comes to a head in the episode Best Self, where the characters face a balloon that will only transport those who've achieved their best possible version. One by one they fail. Chidi spirals into anxiety about whether some other version of himself might be better. Eleanor realizes all of her attempts at honesty are just performances. What starts as an innocent test to see how much they've improved becomes another way to hinder their improvement. The show's biggest revelation, that no one has made it into the good place in centuries because the standards are impossible, is a plot twist that mirrors our own society, where the pursuit of self-improvement has become so extreme, it's literally killing us. Like Nina's bleeding feet, Andrew's bloodied hands, or Bojack's endless cycle of rehab, we've destroyed ourselves trying to reach an impossible standard. What makes Eleanor, Chidi, and even Mob's journeys different from our other examples is how they eventually understand growth. Unlike Nina or Mima's fractured attempts at perfection, Bojack and the narrator's cycles of self-hatred, or Andrew's obsessive pursuit of greatness, they learn that improvement isn't about dramatic transformation or reaching some final perfect state. As Chidi says, life isn't a puzzle that can be solved one time and it's done. You wake up every day and solve it again. This is what real growth looks like. Not a perfect performance that earns your mentor's approval, not a complete reinvention of your identity, not even reaching some numerical threshold of goodness. It's about making slightly better choices each day, understanding that you'll fail sometimes and trying again anyway. As Eleanor tells Michael, that's the whole point. You try. You do good things, and you do bad things. But you try to do good things. When we return to those New Year's resolution posts that opened our discussion, maybe through these stories we can see them differently now. They're not promises of perfection or demands for complete transformation. They're just opportunities to try again, to make one better choice today than we did yesterday. As Chidi finally realizes after lifetimes of searching for perfect answers, there is no answer. And maybe that's the point. When we stop trying to become some idealized version of ourselves where we can finally be present for all the small moments of improvement, where we choose to be a little bit better, a little more authentic, and a little more alive. Did this video spark any ideas for your own writing? Leave a like and share your thoughts and questions in the comments below. Your insights might just help someone who needs it. Until then, whenever you find yourself in a pickle on how to improve your story, just know, ditto. You're not alone, and I'll be here to help.